It was a typical evening in downtown Los Angeles. The sun had just begun to dip below the horizon, casting a soft orange glow across the city. The streets were bustling with activity, cars honking, people chatting, and the occasional loud rev of a motorcycle engine slicing through the air. Among the usual traffic, a figure stood out, Keanu Reeves, effortlessly cruising on his black Ducati. Keanu wasn't just any rider. He was a man of few words, but his presence spoke volumes. Dressed casually, his leather jacket flapping in the wind, he blended in with the crowd, yet he exuded a quiet confidence that made people take notice. The bike hummed smoothly beneath him as he made his way down the avenue, his eyes scanning the road, lost in the simple joy of the ride. For him, it was more than just a hobby. It was a moment of freedom and escape from the chaos of the world. But that evening, things weren't so calm. A group of loud bikers, revving their engines aggressively, zoomed past Keanu. They were all wearing leather jackets, their colors boldly displayed on their vests. Their bikes roared like beasts, and their riders, they had no subtlety. They were here to make noise, make a statement. As Keanu moved through the city streets, a few of them noticed him. "Hey, isn't that Keanu Reeves?" one of the bikers called. Out to his friends, a smirk forming on his face. Another biker, taller with a thick beard and a tattoo of a skull on his arm, chuckled. "Yeah, it's him, all right. Guess he's still living off that Matrix money. But does he even still ride, or is he just out for a joyride like the rest of us?" The gang started to circle around him, getting closer and closer with each pass. The leader of the group, a man known as Razor, pulled up beside Keanu, his engine growling like an angry lion. "Hey, Keanu! You still got it, or are you just cruising down the street for some fresh air?" Razor taunted, his voice dripping with mockery. Keanu glanced over, unfazed by the loud biker's words. He wasn't one to engage in petty banter, but Razor wasn't letting it go. "Come on, old man, let's see what you've got. I'll bet you're not even half the rider you were when you made those action movies. What do you say?" "Racist. Prove you're still relevant," Razor sneered, revving his engine even louder. The challenge hung in the air, thick with tension. Keanu knew that this wasn't just about a simple street race. It was about pride. The bikers didn't see him as a skilled rider. They saw him as a washed-up celebrity who had somehow escaped the world of fame without ever really earning it. This was their chance to knock him off his pedestal. But Keanu wasn't one to back down. He had been on the road long enough to know that sometimes the best way to deal with an unwanted challenge was to rise to it, but on his own terms. His eyes remained calm, his grip on the handlebars steady as he looked ahead. He could feel the buzz of adrenaline starting to kick in, his heartbeat matching the rhythm of his engine. He didn't need to prove anything, but the challenge, it intrigued him. He could feel it in his gut, a reminder that sometimes life required a bit of rebellion, a spark to reignite the fire within. Keanu revved his Ducati, the deep sound vibrating through the street. He gave Razor a subtle nod, signaling that he was ready. "You sure you want to do this?" Keanu's voice was calm, measured. Razor's grin widened, a little too confident. "You bet, old man. Let's see what you've got." And just like that, the street became their battleground. But before they could even line up, the sudden sound of a siren cut through the tension. A police car had rolled up, its flashing lights illuminating the dark street. The bikers scattered in an instant, some disappearing into side streets, others revving their engines and taking off. Keanu and Razor locked eyes for a split second. Razor, annoyed by the disruption, cursed under his breath and sped off, leaving Keanu standing alone in the street. Keanu didn't chase him. Instead, he just let out a small sigh of relief. He wasn't in the mood for a wild chase. His focus had been momentarily distracted, but that was enough to reignite something deep within him. His fingers tightened around the throttle, the excitement of the challenge still buzzing in his veins. As the last of the bikers disappeared into the night, Keanu smiled to himself. "Maybe next time," he murmured under his breath. But what Razor and his crew didn't realize was that Keanu wasn't just a man of action on the screen. He was a man who, when pushed to his limits, could surprise even the toughest of opponents. What do you think Keanu should have done in that moment? Would you have accepted the challenge or walked away? Let us know in the comments below. Keanu Reeves wasn't just a famous Hollywood actor. He was a man of mystery, a symbol of quiet strength and humility. To most, he was the beloved action star from The Matrix, John Wick, and countless other films. But to those who knew him well, Keanu was more than that. He was a man who lived for the thrill of the open road, not for the flashing cameras or the red carpets. Keanu's love for motorcycles had started long before he had ever stepped in front of a camera. As a kid growing up in Toronto, Canada, he had always been a bit of a loner. He wasn't one for the mainstream. While most kids his age played sports or hung out with friends, Keanu found solace in his own world, on two wheels. He'd gotten his first bike at the age of 15, and it was a moment that would change his life forever. The sense of freedom, the wind against his face and the power beneath him made him feel alive in a way that nothing else could. Riding wasn't just a hobby, it was a form of escape. It allowed him to leave behind the pressures of life, the expectations of fame, and just be. But even as his fame skyrocketed, Keanu kept his passion for motorcycles a secret from the public. Few knew how often he spent hours on the road, far from the prying eyes of Hollywood. It was his sanctuary, his way of staying grounded in a world that often felt too chaotic. Keanu's relationship with fame was complicated. While most actors reveled in the attention, he loathed it. He didn't enjoy being the center of attention or living under the microscope of public scrutiny. He preferred to keep to himself, choosing to live simply, without the luxuries most celebrities indulged. And it was during the filming of The Matrix that Keanu first started to make a name for himself as a genuine motorcycle enthusiast. In fact, his love for bikes became somewhat of an obsession. When the cameras weren't rolling, he could be found in the back of the studio parking lot, revving the engine of a motorcycle he had customized himself. He spent hours on the set, perfecting his riding skills, learning tricks and talking shop with the crew. This passion for motorcycles wasn't just for show, it was real. It was a part of who Keanu was. It was part of the reason he had grown so comfortable with his John Wick character, a man who was at his best on the move, in the heat of the chase. But beyond the motorcycle, there was another part of Keanu's life that was even more important to him, his close-knit circle of friends. He valued loyalty and trust above all else. Keanu wasn't someone who needed a large group of people around him. He had a handful of close friends, people who had known him before the fame and who knew who he truly was. One of those friends was John, a fellow rider who had been by Keanu's side since the early days of his career. They had met on the set of Speed, another film that had catapulted Keanu into superstardom, but it was their shared love of motorcycles that had solidified their bond. John wasn't just a friend, he was someone Keanu could trust with his life. It was John who had introduced him to the world of custom bikes, taking him to underground motorcycle races and giving him a taste of the wild side of riding. John was the one who always urged Keanu to step out of the shadows, to embrace the excitement of racing and pushing his limits. And even though Keanu was content with his low-key lifestyle, every now and then, John would remind him of just how much the thrill of the road could awaken his soul. But when it came to the group of bikers who had challenged him earlier, Keanu wasn't sure what to think. Razor and his crew were different. They weren't just random riders looking for a challenge. They were loud, brash, and far from the type of people Keanu usually associated with. It wasn't just the noise or the egos that bothered him. It was the way they treated everything as a competition, as if life itself was one big race. Keanu wasn't interested in proving anything to them, but the challenge still gnawed at him. As Keanu continued his ride that evening, he reflected on the subtle tug-of-war between the quiet life he loved and the chaos of the world that always seemed to pull him back into the spotlight. The challenge from the bikers had been a reminder of something he had almost forgotten: the power of competition, the drive to push yourself beyond your limits. The road was a reflection of life itself, an endless series of twists and turns, unexpected obstacles, and moments of pure freedom. But Keanu knew that in the end it wasn't about winning. It never had been. It was about finding balance, about knowing when to push forward and when to pull back. As he turned onto another street, his Ducati hummed beneath him, a steady rhythmic sound that filled the air. The noise of the city faded away, leaving only the soft rumble of the engine and the feeling of the wind in his hair. For the first time that day, Keanu felt at peace. But he knew that peace would be fleeting. The challenge had been issued, and Keanu Reeves didn't back down from a challenge, especially one that threatened his sense of self. He was about to find out if his love for the road could truly survive the noise and chaos of the world around him. If you were in Keanu's shoes, would you take on the challenge or ride away? How do you balance the pressure of life and the desire for peace? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The following day, the city seemed quieter to Keanu. His mind kept drifting back to the events of the previous evening, the taunts, the challenge, and the group of reckless bikers that had seemed intent on proving something. Keanu hadn't forgotten the feeling of their eyes on him, or the way Razor had challenged him so easily. It wasn't just about riding anymore. It had become a game of pride, and Keanu didn't like playing games he hadn't chosen. But something deep inside him stirred, something he hadn't felt in a while. Razor's words kept echoing in his head. "I'll bet you're not even half the rider you were when you made those action movies." The taunt was more than just a challenge to his skills. It was a challenge to who he was as a person. And that, more than anything, bothered him. Keanu knew this was no longer about bikes or racing. It was about showing that he wasn't someone to be underestimated. He wasn't just some movie star who lived in a fantasy world. He was still a man, of action, on screen and off. And while he didn't care much for proving himself to others this time, he felt like he had something to prove. He decided to call John, his old friend, the one who had introduced him to the world of custom motorcycles all those years ago. There was anyone who understood Keanu's need for a little rebellion, it was John. Their friendship had been built on a shared understanding of each other's passions and their mutual love for the freedom of the road. Keanu met John in a small, quiet cafe on the edge of town. The place was a far cry from the flashing lights of Hollywood. The atmosphere was relaxed, the kind of place where time seemed to slow down, and the world outside felt far away. John, a broad-shouldered man in his mid-40s, sat across from Keanu, with a cup of coffee in hand. His face broke into a grin when he saw Keanu enter. Despite the years that had passed, they slipped back into their easy rapport as if no time had passed at all. "So, what's going on, man?" John asked, leaning back in his chair. Keanu looked out the window for a moment before responding. "You remember those guys I told you about? The ones who ride like they own the streets?" John nodded, already knowing where this conversation was headed. "They're back," Keanu continued, his voice low. "And they've thrown a challenge my way. I think they want to prove something, probably think I've lost my edge." John raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "What? You mean they don't believe the Matrix Keanu is still the same? Guy who can ride with the best of them?" "Exactly," Keanu replied, running a hand through his hair. "And I'm not sure what's worse, their challenge or the fact that part of me actually wants to take them on." John chuckled, leaning forward. "Well, you know what they say. You've always been better on the road than in front of a camera. But I get it. It's not about the race, is it?" Keanu shook his head. "No, it's not. It's about respect. It's about proving that I'm still the guy who can handle whatever life throws at him. I've spent too much time in the shadows, avoiding these types of things, but maybe it's time to step back into the light. Even if I don't need to, I want to. And I want them to see that." John studied him for a moment, then leaned back, his smile widening. "Well, I'm not one to back down from a good race either, but you're right. This isn't about proving something to them. It's about showing yourself who you are, what you're capable of, and if you need me, I'm with you all the way. Just say the word and I'll get the bikes ready." Keanu's gaze softened. John had always been there for him through thick and thin. No questions, no judgment. Just loyalty. "I might just take you up on that," Keanu said, a slight grin forming on his lips. "But I'm not looking for a spectacle. I don't want to give them what they want, a reason to say I'm washed up. I just want to ride and show them that I'm still in the game." John chuckled, giving him a knowing nod. "That's the Keanu I know. No need for the crowd, no need for the noise, just you and the bike." Later that day, as the sun set, over the sprawling city, Keanu and John stood side by side in a secluded parking lot at the edge of town. The place was a secret, known only to a handful of riders who wanted to test their skills without the distractions of the city. The air smelled of gasoline, rubber, and dust, the familiar scent of the road. Keanu looked over at John's bike, a sleek, custom-built machine with matte black paint and a polished chrome engine. It was the kind of bike that exuded power and precision. It was everything Keanu admired, simple but formidable. He was grateful to have a friend who knew what he needed, not flashy, not overdone, but designed for the thrill of the ride. "I'm ready," Keanu said, his voice steady, his eyes focused. John handed him a helmet, and Keanu slipped it on, the cool leather, fitting snugly around his head. As he climbed onto his Ducati, the familiar hum of the engine beneath him brought a sense of calm. This was where he was most at peace, in control, on the edge, with nothing but the road ahead and the wind at his back. Keanu revved the engine and looked over at John. "Let's see what happens." The two riders sped off into the night, their bikes roaring to life as they disappeared down the darkened road. If you were Keanu, how would you handle the challenge from the bikers? Would you confront them head-on, or would you let it go? Tell us what you'd do in the comments below. Dawidu. Night was still young, and the moon hung high above the city like a watchful guardian. Keanu and John sped down the quiet backroads, the hum of their engines cutting through the stillness. The streets were dark, with only the occasional flicker of streetlights to guide their way. It was a contrast to the chaos of the city, a world where time seemed to slow down, and the outside noise faded into nothingness. Keanu's Ducati roared with a power that felt like a heartbeat, its sleek, black frame a perfect extension of his own body. The vibrations from the bike thrummed through his chest as the wind whipped past him, his helmet blocking the world from his face. It was just him, the bike, and the road. Exactly how he liked it. John was close behind, keeping pace effortlessly, as if the two of them were linked by some invisible tether. They had been riding together for years, pushing each other to new limits, always testing the boundaries of their skill and courage. But tonight, there was something different about Keanu. The challenge from Razor and his gang wasn't just an afterthought. It was a reminder that he wasn't as young as he used to be, and in some ways the world had already written him off. But Keanu wasn't ready to be forgotten. Not yet. "You know, this feels different," Keanu called out to John over the wind. His voice muffled but still clear enough. John, leaning into a turn, nodded. "I can feel it. You're not just riding to get away from something anymore. You're riding to prove something." Keanu's grip tightened on the handlebars. "Yeah. I don't like the idea of people thinking I'm past my prime," John chuckled. "If anyone can prove them wrong, it's you." The words hung in the air for a moment as Keanu thought about them. He wasn't just riding to outrun time or erase the doubts. He was riding to remind himself of the strength he'd always had, the focus, the fire that had pushed him through the hardest of challenges, both in movies and in life. He had been through enough to know that you didn't always need a grand gesture to prove your worth. Sometimes it was the quiet moments like this one that defined who you were. As they continued to ride, the city's skyline began to recede, replaced by dark stretches of highway lined with empty fields. The air grew cooler, and the sound of their engines seemed to echo off the surrounding trees, as if the night itself was alive with anticipation. Then, the phone in Keanu's jacket buzzed. He reached for it and saw a text message from an unknown number. "Are you scared to race, or are you just waiting for the right time?" It was from Razor. Keanu felt his pulse quicken. He had been expecting it, but seeing the message in black and white made it feel more real. Razor wasn't going to let up. He wasn't just challenging Keanu's skills on a bike. He was challenging his entire identity. Keanu looked at John, who had noticed the shift in his demeanor. "He's not going to leave you alone, is he?" Keanu shook his head slowly. "No. He wants to break me down. He thinks I'll back off. But I'm not going to give him that satisfaction." John smirked. "Then let's show him what you've got." The tension was palpable now. Keanu had always preferred to keep things low-key, but Razor had pushed him too far. The moment for a quiet ride was over. This was no longer just a ride for the sake of escape. It had become personal. "Where's the meeting point?" Keanu asked, his voice steady but with an edge that was hard to miss. John glanced at his watch, then pointed to a nearby stretch of road. There's a dead-end loop up ahead. It's isolated. Perfect for a race. Keanu nodded. He was ready. But there was something deeper now, a sense of certainty that had come to him in the silence of the ride. The only thing he could control in that moment was his response. And he wouldn't let Razor or anyone make him feel like he didn't. Belong on the road. As they approached the dead-end loop, Keanu's mind raced. His heart was steady, his breathing controlled. He had faced challenges in his career that had tested him in ways he couldn't have imagined. This wasn't the first time someone had underestimated him, and it wouldn't be the last. But this was different. This wasn't a movie set, and there weren't any special effects to hide behind. This was just him and the road. Keanu and John stopped at the entrance of the loop, both riders surveying the scene ahead. The area was deserted, just an empty stretch of asphalt that twisted and turned with sharp corners. Perfect for a race that would test both speed and precision. Keanu felt a wave of calm wash over him. The world seemed to narrow in on this moment. It was just him and the track. The challenge was clear now. You ready? John asked. Keanu smiled, a rare moment of pure confidence. Let's do it. But just as the words left his mouth, the roar of engines filled the air. Razor and his crew had arrived. The gang of bikers screeched to a halt, their loud engines reverberating through the night. Razor stepped off his bike, his leather vest gleaming. In the moonlight, his smirk was as wide as ever. Well, well, Razor said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. I was starting to think you weren't going to show up, Keanu. You still think you have what it takes? Keanu didn't respond immediately. He just kicked his stand down and stood there, eyes locked on Razor. This wasn't about talking anymore. It was time to prove it. Razor's grin faltered as he realized that Keanu wasn't backing down. The challenge was on. Do you think Keanu is making the right decision by accepting the challenge from Razor? Or should he have walked away? Let us know in the comments below. The night air was thick with tension as Razor's crew gathered in a loose circle, their eyes fixed on Keanu. The moment had arrived, and the quiet, steady man who had once been Hollywood's golden boy was now standing at the edge of a high-stakes race, surrounded by loud, cocky bikers eager to see if he still had the chops to keep up. Keanu stood next to his Ducati, his body tense but calm. His focus was razor-sharp, cutting through the noise and the doubt. He didn't need to speak. The bike, his presence, and his reputation spoke louder than any words could. This wasn't about proving anything to Razor or his crew. It was about proving something to himself. Razor eyed him from across the pavement, his lips curled into a smirk. The gang behind him whispered amongst themselves, throwing looks of disbelief at each other. Keanu Reeves, a Hollywood star, was going to race them. Wasn't he too old for this? Too soft? Keanu could feel their eyes, their judgments. But it didn't affect him. This wasn't a movie and there was no script. There was just the road, the speed, and the fire in his chest. It had been a long time since he'd raced like this, but the raw electric feeling of adrenaline coursing through him was as familiar as breathing. Razor stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. All right, Keanu, this is how it's going to go down. We'll race to the end of the loop and back. First one to cross the line wins, no tricks, no backup, just raw skill. Keanu's eyes never left Razor. He nodded slightly, his face betraying no emotion. He wasn't worried about the rules. He wasn't worried about the outcome. He wasn't worried about anything except the ride. John stood beside him, crossing his arms and giving Keanu a look that said, "You've got this, man." The years of friendship, the silent understanding between them, it was all there in that glance. No need for words. The sound of engines revving echoed into the night. One by one, the bikers from Razor's crew fired up their bikes, each one more aggressive and showy than the last. The roar of their engines filled the air, challenging the silence, but Keanu remained unfazed. His Ducati purred beneath him as he turned the ignition on. The machine was a reflection of him, unassuming but powerful. No need for noise to make an impact. Razor glanced at Keanu, his eyes narrowing. "You sure you still have it? I've heard the rumors." Keanu didn't respond, but his body language said it all. Razor wasn't going to get under his skin. He wasn't here to talk. He was here to race. Without another word, Razor signaled to his crew. They revved their engines. In unison, each one eager to be the first off the line. Razor glanced at Keanu, his eyes flicking from the Ducati to the eager faces of his crew. He was looking for a weakness, any sign of hesitation, but all he saw was calm determination. "You better hope you're not too rusty," Razor muttered, still holding on to the belief that this would be an easy victory for his crew. The countdown began, a slow, deliberate roll of numbers in the air. 3, 2, 1. And just like that, the world exploded into motion. The roar of engines filled the night as the bikes shot forward, kicking up dust and gravel in their wake. The light from the moon reflected off the asphalt, casting a pale, eerie glow over the track as Keanu leaned into the turn, his body working. In perfect sync with the bike beneath him, Razor and his crew shot ahead, their bikes built for power and speed. But Keanu's Ducati was built for control. As they sped down the straightaway, Keanu stayed calm, holding back, not pushing the bike to its limits just yet. The race was still young, and Keanu wasn't going to burn out too soon. Ahead, Razor took the first corner with ease, but the second turn came up quickly. Keanu watched closely, his eyes trained on Razor's every move. He knew how Razor rode, flashy, aggressive, but with little regard for control when the stakes got high. Razor's bike was fast, but Keanu's strength was in precision. As the two riders neared the second corner, Razor pushed harder, taking the turn at a dangerous speed. Keanu knew it was coming, the overconfidence, the reckless edge, and he made his move. He leaned into the turn with surgical precision, the Ducati responding effortlessly to his every command. While Razor's back wheels slid slightly, forcing him to correct mid-turn, Keanu's bike cut through the curve as though it was designed for it. The gap between them began to shrink. Razor cursed under his breath as Keanu's Ducati pulled alongside him. His eyes shot toward the Hollywood star beside him. Impossible, he thought. This guy is good, better than I thought. Keanu didn't smile. He didn't need to. His focus was laser sharp, each movement deliberate and calculated. He had no intention of giving up this opportunity, not to Razor, not to anyone. He pushed forward, gaining speed, pulling ahead as the race neared the halfway point. Razor scrambled to catch up, his bike roaring behind Keanu in a desperate bid to overtake him. John, watching from the sidelines, let out a low whistle. Keanu's got this. The two racers rounded the final turn, the finish line in sight. Razor was breathing heavily, pushing his bike harder than ever, but Keanu was in control. He had been here before many times, and he knew that it wasn't about who crossed the line first. It was about who kept their cool when it mattered most. Keanu took the final corner like a seasoned pro, gliding through it effortlessly as Razor slammed his bike into the turn with all the force he could muster. But it was too late. Keanu crossed the finish line, his Ducati still purring with power. Razor's crew was silent, watching in disbelief as the Hollywood star, an older man, a man they had underestimated, beat them at their own game. Razor pulled up, his face flushed with frustration. He cut the engine and dismounted, glaring at Keanu. How did you do that?" Keanu's eyes met his, cool and composed. "It's not about speed. It's about control." The bikers around them stood still, speechless. Keanu had done more than win a race. He had proven that no one, no matter how loud or confident they were, could break him. This was his world, his road, and no amount of taunting could change that. As the last of Razor's crew started to leave in silence, Keanu stood tall, his chest rising and falling with each steady breath. He hadn't done this for the victory. It was never about that. It was about showing that sometimes the quietest person in the room had the power to leave the loudest impact. Keanu just showed Razor and his crew who's in charge. But what do you think? Did Keanu prove something to himself? Or was it more about showing others that you can still be at the top? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The race was over, but the night had just begun to unravel its true implications. As the sound of revving engines faded into the distance, a deep silence settled over the scene. Razor's crew had dispersed without another word, leaving behind a trail of dust and disappointment. Keanu and John stood alone on the deserted track. The only sounds now were the soft hum of Keanu's Ducati and the distant rustle of wind through the trees. Keanu's heart was still racing, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. But it wasn't the thrill of victory that kept him grounded. It was the realization that this moment, this race, had been more than just about a challenge on the road. It had been about reclaiming something that he thought he had lost. His own belief in himself. John came over, clapping him on the back. "Man, I knew you still had it in you. That was some race." Keanu gave him a rare smile, his eyes reflecting a quiet satisfaction. "I guess I never lost it. Just needed a reminder." But the satisfaction was fleeting, as Keanu's mind began to shift toward the bigger picture. Razor and his gang were not just any bikers, they were a symbol of something much more dangerous. They represented the kind of people who took pleasure in breaking others down, in feeding off the insecurities of those they thought they could dominate. Tonight had been a victory, but the war wasn't over. Keanu ran a hand through his hair and exhaled deeply. "This isn't just about a race, John. Razor's not the type to walk away after losing. He's going to come back, harder, angrier. And next time it won't just be about a race, he'll make it personal." John nodded, understanding the weight of Keanu's words. "You think he's going to try something? Maybe bring in more guys?" "Probably," Keanu said, his voice laced with caution. "People like him don't take kindly to being shown up. He'll find a way to take it further. He'll want to break me down in a way that doesn't involve just winning a race." There was a brief pause as both men stood silently, the implications of Keanu's words hanging in the air. It wasn't just the bikers that posed a threat now. It was the idea that Razor would take this challenge and twist it into something darker, something more dangerous. Keanu turned to his bike, running his fingers over the sleek frame. "I don't know what's coming next, but I'll be ready. I've had my share of people trying to bring me down. It's no different, but I can't let him think he's won. Not now." John, always the loyal friend, slapped him on the shoulder again. "You'll be ready, I'm with you, whatever happens." Keanu appreciated the sentiment, but a quiet part of him wondered just how deep this would go. Was this all just some ego trip for Razor and his crew, or was there something more behind it? Keanu had no way of knowing yet, but he had a feeling that this would escalate quickly. Razor had made it clear that he didn't just want to beat Keanu, he wanted to humiliate him, to make an example out of him. Keanu's phone buzzed again, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a message from an unknown number. He opened it, and his eyes scanned the text. "You won this time, Keanu, but there are ways of winning that don't always involve speed. Watch your back." It was short, to the point, but the threat was clear. Keanu's grip tightened around his phone. Razor wasn't done with him, not by a long shot. "This is only the beginning, isn't it?" John asked, his voice low. Keanu didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. The weight of the message was enough. Razor had made his move, but Keanu wasn't about to run. He couldn't, not after everything he had been through. "No," Keanu finally said, his voice steady. "It's not over." John's brow furrowed as he looked around the empty track. "What's the plan then?" Keanu took a deep breath. "The plan is to keep riding, keep moving forward. If Razor wants a fight, he's going to get one, but I won't give him the satisfaction of breaking me. I'll deal with whatever comes next. We can't let fear hold us back." John nodded, his gaze firm. "We're in this together." Keanu gave him a grateful nod, though a flicker of uncertainty lingered in his chest. Razor was unpredictable. He was the type of person who thrived on chaos, on fear. And Keanu was beginning to realize that this wasn't going to be just about the race anymore. This was going to get personal. Razor was going to come after him in ways Keanu wasn't prepared for, but he had been in tight spots before. He had faced demons, both on and off the screen, and came out the other side stronger. This time wouldn't be different. "We ride," Keanu said finally, his voice calm but determined, "and we stay ahead of whatever comes our way." As the two men climbed back onto their bikes, the weight of the night seemed to settle on them, but Keanu felt a strange sense of clarity. The world around him might be shifting, but he wouldn't let it shake him. No matter what Razor threw at him, Keanu was ready. The engine roared to life once again, breaking the silence. The road stretched out before them, an endless horizon of possibility and danger. Keanu had faced the unknown many times before, and tonight he was ready to face it once again. Keanu's facing a major threat from Razor and his gang, but he's not backing down. What do you think Keanu should do next? Should he fight fire with fire, or find another way to handle the situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The streets were quieter than usual, but Keanu could feel the change in the air. It wasn't just the adrenaline or the quiet hum of his Ducati as it glided over the asphalt. It was the feeling that something was shifting. Something bigger than a race, bigger than a challenge. Razor's words, his threat, still echoed in Keanu's mind. Watch your back. The kind of warning that meant business, the kind of threat you couldn't ignore. Keanu and John made their way through the city, heading toward an abandoned warehouse district on the outskirts, a place Keanu knew all too well. It was the kind of place where deals went down, the type of place where bikers like Razor thrived. In a world where speed was everything, these were the places that made and broke reputations. And Keanu, for better or worse, had made a reputation tonight. "I don't like this man," John said, his voice low as they cruised down the deserted road. "This isn't just about winning anymore. Razor's got something else planned." Keanu nodded, his eyes scanning the surroundings, watching for any sign of movement. Razor wasn't a man who took a loss lightly, and with the message Keanu had received earlier, he knew this wasn't going to be a simple fight. Razor had connections, had people who worked in the shadows, people who didn't play by the rules. The game had changed, and it was no longer about just outpacing your opponent. As they approached the warehouse, the dark silhouette of the building loomed ahead, its windows shattered, the whole structure appearing forgotten and abandoned. But Keanu knew better. Nothing was abandoned in this world. It was a place where deals went down, where danger lurked around every corner, and now it was a place he had to visit if he was going to survive what was coming next. "Stay sharp," Keanu said, pulling his bike to a stop in front of the warehouse. His voice was steady, calm, but there was an edge to it. John dismounted without a word, his eyes sharp, his body coiled in preparation. This wasn't a place they could afford to be caught off guard. The two men walked into the shadows of the warehouse, each step echoing through the cold, empty space. It was as if the walls themselves were watching, waiting for something to happen. The air was thick with the smell of rust and decay, but Keanu's focus was elsewhere. He was listening for any sign of movement, any whisper of voices. He could feel the pressure mounting in his chest, a tightening sensation that reminded him of the countless standoffs he'd been through in his past. John whispered, "Do you think this is where Razor's pulling the strings from? This place is all the marks of a trap." Keanu didn't respond at first, his gaze scanning the dark corners, but he knew it. The feeling was unmistakable. Razor was setting him up. He had to make sure he was one step ahead. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a man, tall, wearing a leather jacket with patches Keanu didn't recognize. His face was hard, eyes steely and unblinking. He stepped forward, his boots clicking against the cold concrete floor, each step deliberate. "Keanu," the man said in a gravelly voice, his tone almost mocking. "Razor's been waiting for you." Keanu didn't flinch. He had dealt with worse. "I'm here now," he said, his voice even. "Tell Razor I'm not backing down." The man's lips curled into a smirk, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Razor's got a message for you. He wants you to understand something. You can't outrun this." Keanu narrowed his eyes. "I've outrun worse." The man chuckled darkly. "You might have outrun a few bikers, Keanu, but there's a whole network behind this. Razor's not just some street racer. He's got people, he's got connections, and you've just crossed into a territory you don't want to mess with." Keanu's mind was already racing, trying to piece everything together. He'd been so focused on the race, on proving himself, that he hadn't fully grasped the scale of what he was dealing with. Razor wasn't just a local thug, he was part of something much bigger, and now Keanu was tangled up in it. "You should have stayed out of this, Keanu," the man continued, taking another step closer, his presence imposing. "But since you've decided to stick around, you're going to learn the hard way that we don't play by your rules." Keanu's hand instinctively went to the leather jacket he was wearing, where he kept a small, sharp knife for emergencies. But he didn't pull it out yet. There was no need to escalate things, at least not yet. He was playing a dangerous game, and he couldn't afford to make a mistake. Before Keanu could respond, another figure emerged from the shadows. This one was smaller, faster, and had a wild energy about him. It was Razor, the same cocky biker who had taunted him before, but now there was something more dangerous in his eyes. Something darker. "You think you've got it all figured out, don't you, Keanu?" Razor said, his voice low and cold. "You think this is just about the race? You think you can come into my world and take my crown just like that?" Keanu held Razor's gaze, his posture unyielding. "I'm not here for your crown, Razor. I'm here to show you that you can't bully your way to the top." Razor's lips twisted into a sneer. "It's not about bullying, Keanu. It's about power, control, something you're too soft to understand." A brief silence fell over them, the tension thick and palpable. Then Razor stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Keanu. "But you'll learn soon enough. And when you do, you'll understand why you can't win this. Not in my world." Keanu's heart was pounding, but he kept his voice steady. "I fought for everything I have, and I won't let you take it from me." Razor laughed, the sound echoing through the empty warehouse. You'll see just how far I'm willing to go to make sure you don't win." With that, Razor signaled to his men, who slowly began to surround Keanu and John. The odds were stacked against them now, but Keanu wasn't afraid. He wasn't backing down. Razor's crew might think they had the upper hand, but Keanu had something they didn't experience. The game had changed, but Keanu was ready to play. Razor has a whole network behind him, and it's clear he's not going to back down. What do you think Keanu should do next? Should he try to escape, or is it time to confront Razor head-on? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The tension in the air felt like a pressure cooker, about to explode. Keanu's instincts were sharp, but the numbers were against them. Razor's gang had them surrounded, the warehouse now alive with the low hum of dangerous energy. Keanu could see the sneers and the cocky grins of the bikers, but he didn't let his gaze falter. Not for a second. Razor had called the shots so far, but Keanu wasn't going to let him dictate the game any longer. John, standing at Keanu's side, was calm, but there was a spark in his eyes that told Keanu he wasn't planning to go down without a fight. The men surrounding them were tough, but Keanu knew the power of unity. John wasn't just a sidekick in this story. He was a brother, a friend, and tonight he'd fight beside Keanu, no matter what. Razor smirked as he took a few steps closer, his boots echoing off the cold concrete. "You really think you can win this, Keanu? You think you can handle what's coming?" Keanu's voice was low, steady, and full of resolve. "I'm not here to win, Razor. I'm here to make sure you don't get to call the shots anymore." Razor's face twisted in a mixture of disbelief and anger. "You really don't understand, do you?" He looked around at his men, then back to Keanu. "You're out of your league, Keanu. You're just another wannabe trying to make a name for himself, but there's a line you crossed tonight, and I don't let people like you cross my line." Keanu didn't flinch. The heat of the moment burned like fire in his chest, but it only steeled his resolve. He'd been underestimated too many times in his life, and every single time he'd come back stronger. This wasn't just about the race anymore. It was about standing up for himself and proving that no one, not even Razor, could take away his dignity. "You don't control everything, Razor," Keanu said, his voice hardening. "I've fought through worse than this, and I'm not going to back down now." Razor laughed, a dark, menacing sound that echoed through the warehouse. "You really think you're in control here? You're just a pawn in a game you don't even understand. You've stepped into my world, and now you're going to pay for it." John took a step forward, his jaw set. "We're not afraid of you, Razor. You might have numbers, but you don't have what it takes to break us." Keanu could see the way Razor's eyes flickered with anger. There it was, the first crack in his tough exterior. Razor didn't like being challenged. He wasn't used to it. The moment Keanu had taken that first risk by racing him, he had shifted the power dynamic. Razor might think he was the one pulling the strings, but in reality the game was still wide open. Razor's face darkened as he turned to his men. "You know what to do," he said coldly. The bikers moved in closer, surrounding Keanu and John. The sound of their boots on the concrete echoed, amplifying the pressure, but Keanu didn't move. He wasn't going to let fear get the better of him now. "Come on then," Keanu said, his voice rising with a challenge. "Let's see what you've got." There was a moment of silence, a standoff. The bikers all seemed to pause, waiting for something to happen. Then suddenly, one of the men lunged forward, reaching for Keanu. But in that split second, Keanu was already moving. His body reacted without hesitation, the instincts honed from years of racing and surviving dangerous situations kicking in. Keanu ducked, sidestepping the man's advance, and before the biker could turn, Keanu's hand shot out, grabbing the man's arm and twisting it behind his back, forcing him to the ground. The biker grunted in pain, but Keanu didn't stop. His foot came down on the man's chest, keeping him pinned while he quickly turned his attention back to Razor and the others. John, not missing a beat, was already locked in with another biker, using his speed and agility to avoid being caught. Keanu watched as John tackled one of Razor's men, knocking him into a stack of old crates. It was chaos, but Keanu and John were a well-oiled team, and nothing Razor had would be enough to take them down easily. Razor's anger flared as he saw one of his men go down. "What the hell is this?" he shouted, drawing a knife from his belt and charging forward. But Keanu was ready. In one fluid motion, Keanu ducked under Razor's swing, his hand grabbing a piece of metal piping that lay discarded on the ground. He swung it with precision, knocking the knife out of Razor's hand with a sharp clang. Razor staggered back, momentarily off balance. "Don't think you're winning this," Razor snarled, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a small pistol. The weapon gleamed in the dim light, and Keanu's heart skipped a beat. This was no longer just a fight. It was turning deadly. But before Razor could aim, Keanu closed the distance, grabbing Razor by the wrist and twisting it hard, forcing the gun to the ground. With a swift kick, he sent the weapon skidding across the floor out of reach. Razor was furious now, but Keanu could see the shift. Razor wasn't in control anymore. He was desperate. The tables had turned. "This is your last warning, Keanu." Razor hissed through gritted teeth, his breath heavy with rage. "You don't know who you're messing with." Keanu stood tall, eyes locked with Razor's. "I'm messing with you, Razor, and I'm not backing down." The warehouse fell into silence again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet as before. This time it was the silence of realization. Razor understood now that he wasn't the one calling the shots. Keanu was no longer the challenger. He was the one in control. Keanu took a slow, measured step back, his eyes scanning the room. "I'm done playing your game," he said, his voice steady, "but I'll make sure you never play it again." Keanu's just turned the tables on Razor. Do you think this is the beginning of the end for Razor's reign, or is there still more danger lurking? What's Keanu's next move? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The rumble of engines grew louder, echoing through the warehouse like thunder before a storm. Keanu's eyes never left Razor, but his mind raced, calculating their options. John stood at his side, equally prepared but just as aware of the overwhelming odds against them. Razor's reinforcements were closing in, and every second felt like an eternity. "We don't have much time," John said, his voice tight with urgency. "We need a plan now." Keanu nodded, his mind already working through the options. They were cornered, outnumbered, but not outmatched. They had to move fast, but they also had to make every action count. This wasn't just about fighting, it was about outsmarting Razor and his gang. And Keanu knew one thing for sure. There was always a way out, always a way to turn the tables. "You take the left flank, I'll take the right," Keanu said, his tone focused and decisive. "We hit them hard and fast. Don't give them a chance to think. We need to break their numbers before they can form a solid front." John nodded, understanding exactly what Keanu meant. The bikers might have strength in numbers, but they didn't have the same coordination and precision that Keanu and John did. They were fighters, not just bikers. Without another word, they split up, moving silently through the shadows, keeping to the narrow gaps between the crates and stacks of metal. The warehouse had once been a place of rust and decay, but now it was about to become the arena for the fight of their lives. Keanu crouched low as he approached the first biker, who was busy glancing around, unaware of the danger approaching. Keanu's movement was smooth and calculated. His years of experience racing and fighting had honed his reflexes to a razor-sharp edge. In one swift motion, he grabbed the biker's shoulder and slammed him into a stack of crates, knocking the wind out of him. The man hit the ground hard, but Keanu didn't stop. He quickly disarmed him, taking the guy's weapon and tossing it aside. Meanwhile, John was a blur of motion on the other side of the warehouse. He took out two bikers in quick succession, his attacks swift and precise. The bikers didn't know what hit them, their attempts to regroup falling apart in the face of John's brutal efficiency. Keanu watched from the corner of his eye, nodding in approval. They were working like a team, each man handling his part of the battle with ruthless precision, but Razor's reinforcements kept coming, more of them emerging from the shadows, each one bringing a new wave of danger. Keanu's heart pounded in his chest, but his focus remained laser-sharp. He couldn't let up now, not when they were so close. Razor was still on the ground, but he wasn't finished yet. The man was struggling to get to his feet, and Keanu could see the hatred burning in his eyes. Razor's pride had been wounded, but it wasn't just his pride he was fighting for now. It was his empire. Keanu knew Razor would never let it go without one last desperate attempt to take control. Not so fast, Razor growled, pulling himself up with difficulty. His voice was hoarse, filled with rage. "You think you've won, Keanu? You're just a pawn, and pawns get eliminated." Keanu turned his attention to Razor, watching the man's every move. There was something in the way Razor held himself, like a man who'd lost everything but was willing to burn it all down, just to take his enemy with him. Keanu didn't respond. He didn't need to. Instead, he readied himself for the next phase of the fight. Razor was dangerous, but Keanu was smarter. He wasn't about to let Razor make this a personal vendetta. The stakes were too high now. It was about survival. Suddenly, the first of Razor's bikers broke from the group and charged at Keanu, brandishing a crowbar. Keanu moved just in time to sidestep the swing, grabbing the man by the wrist and twisting it with a sharp motion. The biker yelped in pain, dropping the crowbar as Keanu forced him to the ground. He didn't have time to deal with this one. He needed to keep moving, keep fighting. At the same moment, Keanu heard a shout from across the warehouse. John had been cornered. Two bikers had managed to land a blow, sending him to the ground. Keanu's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't afford to let John fall. Not now. With a fierce growl, Keanu rushed to his friend's aid, pushing through the chaos, dodging and striking with all the fury he could muster. Razor's men were closing in from all sides, but Keanu wasn't about to let them win. John fought back, but he was outnumbered. Keanu reached him just in time, pulling one of the bikers off of him and throwing him into the wall with a resounding crash. The second biker lunged at Keanu, but Keanu was quicker, kicking the man in the chest and sending him sprawling across the floor. John staggered to his feet, breathing heavily. "Thanks," he said, a small grin breaking through his exhaustion. "No time for that," Keanu replied, his voice grim. "We need to end this now." They fought side by side, moving with the fluidity of a well-practiced team. They dodged and weaved, delivering strikes that incapacitated their enemies one by one. Razor's men were falling apart, disorganized and desperate, unable to match Keanu and John's determination. But Razor wasn't done yet. He had pulled himself up fully now, rage evident in his eyes. "You think you can take me down? You think you can take everything from me?" His voice was hoarse, almost desperate. "I'll make sure you regret this." Keanu locked eyes with Razor, feeling the weight of his words. But Keanu wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The fight was almost over, and it was time to finish it. "I'm not afraid of you, Razor," Keanu said, his voice steady and unyielding. "This ends tonight." With that, Keanu rushed forward one final time, using his momentum to knock Razor off balance and take him down to the ground. Razor struggled, but Keanu had him pinned now. This was it, the final showdown. The end of Razor's reign. Razor spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You might win this fight, Keanu, but you'll never escape me. I'll always be one step behind you." Keanu's grip tightened as he looked down at Razor. Not anymore. Keanu's made his final move. Razor's reign is crumbling, but the battle isn't over. Do you think Keanu and John will walk away victorious? Or is there another twist waiting for them? How do you think this fight will end? Let us know what you think in the comments. The tension in the air was suffocating. Keanu stood over Razor, his breathing heavy but steady. The man beneath him was no longer the arrogant, unstoppable force that had terrorized the streets. He was broken, desperate, and yet there was a cold fury in his eyes, like a man who had lost everything but was still willing to take one final swing. Keanu didn't move, his hands firm on Razor's shoulders, pinning him to the ground. Behind him, John was catching his breath, his eyes scanning the room for any remaining threats. The bikers who had been part of Razor's crew were either unconscious or disarmed, sprawled across the warehouse floor. There was nothing left but the sound of ragged breaths and the hum of the engines outside. Razor's chest heaved with anger and defiance. "You think you've beaten me, don't you?" he spat, the venom clear in his voice. "You think you're the hero? You've made an enemy of me, and that's something you'll regret." Keanu's eyes narrowed, but his grip on Razor's shoulders remained unyielding. "This isn't about being a hero," Keanu said coldly. "This is about ending the chaos you've caused. You've hurt too many people, Razor. It ends tonight." "No more running, no more games." Razor sneered up at him, but Keanu wasn't intimidated. There were no more words left to say. It was over. The power Razor once held, the fear he spread, was fading. Razor may have had power and influence once, but now he was just a man, a broken man, and Keanu wasn't going to let him escape the consequences. The warehouse door burst open suddenly, the bright headlights of a motorcycle cutting through, the dark like a blade. A shadowy figure emerged from the doorway, its silhouette instantly recognizable. Another biker, probably one of Razor's last-ditch efforts to send reinforcements. The newcomer's eyes locked on Keanu and John, and without missing a beat, he revved the engine, preparing to charge. But before the biker could even get his bearings, Keanu moved swiftly, grabbing the nearest object, an old, discarded wrench, and tossing it with deadly accuracy. It hit the biker square in the head, knocking him off his bike and sending him sprawling onto the floor. The sound of the engine sputtering to a halt echoed throughout the warehouse. There was no escape now for anyone. John stepped forward, wiping his brow and checking to make sure the area was secure. He met Keanu's gaze, nodding. "You did it, it's over." Keanu's face was unreadable as he looked down at Razor, who was still struggling beneath him. "I didn't do it alone," he said quietly. "Yeah," John said, "but it's you who called the shots. You brought us here." Keanu turned his attention back to Razor. The once invincible biker was trying to squirm free, but Keanu wasn't about to let him off so easily. He stood up, and with one final push he pressed Razor's face into the cold concrete floor. "You know," Keanu said, his voice low but resolute, "you could have had everything. You had power, money, respect, but you used it all to hurt people. This isn't the way." Razor's breath was ragged as he gasped. "I did what I had to do to survive." "No," Keanu replied, shaking his head. "You did it because you're too selfish to see the bigger picture." Keanu let out a breath, pushing up from Razor. It was clear now that the battle had been won, but there were still lingering thoughts. He wasn't just leaving Razor there to be arrested. That wasn't the way Keanu operated. He had lived too much of his life in the shadows to believe that the law would always be the answer. Razor's fate would be far worse than any prison sentence. Razor finally went still, his face still a mixture of hatred and disbelief. "You think you've changed anything? You'll never get away from me," he spat one final time. Keanu bent down, his voice now a whisper. "You're nothing but a ghost. You'll fade away just like everyone else who thought they were untouchable. You'll never be a threat again." Keanu turned his back on Razor, motioning for John to follow him. As they walked away from the fallen leader, they could hear the sounds of sirens in the distance, signaling the arrival of the authorities. The bikers who remained conscious were already fleeing, but Keanu and John weren't sticking around to wait for the aftermath. They had won their fight, but the real battle, Keanu's own journey, was still far from over. John paused, looking back at the chaos they'd left behind. "You think it's really over?" Keanu didn't look back. Instead, he walked toward The exit, his steps steady and sure. I think it's the beginning of something new. The two men walked out into the night, the cold air a sharp contrast to the heat of the battle they had just endured. The streets were empty, and the only sound was the hum of their footsteps echoing through the quiet city. The war on the streets, at least for now, was over, but Keanu knew that the world he had lived in would never be the same. It wasn't about the bikes. It wasn't about the power. It was about finding peace, about taking control of the life he had once lost. And maybe, just maybe, he could finally walk away from the shadows that had haunted him for so long. Keanu and John have fought through chaos, and with Razor defeated, it's clear they've turned the page on this chapter of their lives. But what happens next? Was this the end of Keanu's journey or just the beginning of something more? What do you think Keanu's next move should be? Share your thoughts below and let us know what you would do if you were in his shoes. If you've enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this.